We all live in this exact same food environment. If we're all swimming in the exact same sea of dopamine, ultra-processed foods, and hyperpalatable engineered snacks, why is one person's brain hijacked, leading to severe treatment-resistant obesity, while another person seems completely immune? Why does one nervous system treat a donut as a simple passing treat, while another nervous system treats it as a powerful, necessary sedative? Why does one body naturally burn off excess energy while another body holds on to it? Today, we're going to discuss the single most overlooked, misunderstood, and stigmatized factor in the global obesity epidemic. We're talking about adverse childhood experiences and the permanent biological rewiring of your metabolism. I'm Dr. Amin Hedayat, triple board certified physician, assistant clinical professor, and pathologist. I appreciate you subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the videos as they get released. Before we go any further, here's a note of care. If you have experienced early life trauma, whether that's abuse, neglect, or extreme household dysfunction, some of the concepts we discussed today might be difficult to hear. It may bring up the past, but please understand the intention. This is not about blame, not about labeling you as broken. My goal today is to show you the rigorous peer-reviewed science of your own resilience. I want to show you that your body did exactly what it needed to do to survive an unsafe environment. Your weight is not a character flaw, and it's in fact a brilliant biological adaptation. In our last episode, we mapped out the neuroscience of hijack. We discussed how the modern food environment hacks your dopamine pathways, overriding your prefrontal cortex. We talked about the difference between wanting and liking, and how sugar and fat can physically downregulate your reward system, leaving you in a chronic state of dopamine deficit. But that explanation, as neurologically accurate as it is, leaves a big question unanswered. Today, we're going to look at the hardware and the software of your stress response. We'll explore how early life stress can permanently change the set point of your cortisol, alters physical architecture of your fat cells, and change the way your DNA is read through a process called epigenetics. We're going to explain why, for a traumatized nervous system, obesity is not a metabolic dysfunction, and in fact, it's a necessary, calculated, and mathematically precise adaptation for survival. To understand this, we'll travel back in time to 1985, and we'll go to a clinic in San Diego, California that accidentally discovered the root cause of the modern obesity crisis. Dr. Vincent Felitti was a highly respected preventive medicine physician running a successful weight loss clinic at Kaiser Permanente. His program was the gold standard of the 1980s. Strict liquid diets, intensive medical monitoring, and rapid, dramatic weight loss. And clinically, looking at the charts, it was working great. Patients were losing hundreds of pounds. Their blood pressure was dropping. Their type 2 diabetes was reversing. But then Dr. Felitti noticed a deeply disturbing patterns in his data. The patients who were succeeding the most, the ones rapidly shedding the weight and hitting their target BMIs, were suddenly dropping out of the program. Surprisingly, they were quitting because they were succeeding. Dr. Felitti was baffled because it made no medical sense. He tracked down one of his patients, a woman who had lost a massive amount of weight, looked fantastic on paper, and then suddenly regained it all back and abandoned the clinic. He sat her down and asked, "What happened? Your blood work had improved and you were doing so well." She told him a story about her childhood. It was a story of abuse, a story where being small, unnoticed, and attractive was deeply physically dangerous, and being big, heavy, and imposing felt safe. Her weight was acting as a physical shield. When the shield disappeared, the terror returned. I want to pause here. Does this resonate with anyone watching? Have you or anyone you know ever successfully lost weight, started receiving compliments, and suddenly felt a wave of unexplained anxiety that led you straight back to your starting weight? Drop a yes in the comments if you've experienced this so-called self-sabotage. I want you to look at the comments and see that you're not alone. This single conversation sparked a hypothesis that led to one of the largest and consequential public health studies in history, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente partnered to survey over 17,000 middle-class Americans. They asked them 10 specific uncomfortable questions about their childhood environments before the age of 18. Did you experience physical abuse, emotional neglect? Was there a parent with active addiction at home? Was there a violent divorce? Was there incarceration? Was there sexual trauma? They gave everyone a score from 0 to 10. The results they found were medically surprising. They found a dose-dependent relationship between the number of trauma categories a person experienced and their risk of chronic disease in adulthood. Dose-dependent means the higher the dose of trauma, the higher the rate of disease. According to the data, if you had an ACE score of 4 or higher, your risk of severe obesity didn't just go up a few percentage points. It in fact doubled. Your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and severe autoimmune disorders also went up. But here's a critical pivot of our story. When the study was published, the medical community and the general public looked at this data and drew an overly simplistic and biased conclusion. They said, oh, well, these people are stressed out, so they eat comfort food to cope with their feelings. It's a behavioral issue. They just need better coping mechanisms. But as a physician who studied the pathology of these diseases, I can tell you that this view is scientifically incomplete and, dare I say, medically negligent. What we now know, thanks to 30 years of advancements in neuroendocrinology, is that severe early life trauma can fundamentally disrupt your HPA axis, which is beyond just making you sad or stressed. When a developing human nervous system is exposed to chronic unpredictability, whether that's physical violence, emotional neglect, or the chaos of the dysregulated household, it learns one specific overriding lesson. The environment is hostile, and the world is unsafe. To survive an unsafe world, the body must constantly be ready for war. It initiates a physiological threat response. It recruits a neuroendocrine superhighway known as the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. Think of the hypothalamus located deep into the brain as the radar system. When it detects a threat, it sends a chemical signal to the pituitary gland, the commander. The pituitary then sends an urgent message down to the adrenal glands, which sits right on top of your kidneys. The adrenals then secrete a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is the master stress hormone. It's designed to save your life in the short term. When that cortisol floods your bloodstream, it does 3 very specific things to help you survive a famine or a physical fight. First, it immediately raises your blood sugar. It signals your liver to dump glucose into your veins so your muscles have instant fuel to run or fight. Second, it raises your blood pressure to forcefully pump that oxygenated, sugar-rich blood to your extremities. Third, it shuts down all non-essential long-term projects. It halts digestion. It suppresses the reproductive system. It pauses immune repair. You don't need to digest a sandwich or fight off a mild cold if you're about to be eaten by a predator. In a normal, healthy life, stress is an acute spike. You see a tiger, cortisol spikes. You run, you hopefully survive, the tiger leaves, and cortisol drops back to baseline. The parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and you rest and digest, and the system resets. But what happens when the tiger lives in your house? What happens when the life-threatening danger is a chaotic, unpredictable parent? Or the chronic stress of deep poverty? Or the silent, terrifying fear of abandonment? You can't fight them, and you can't run away from them. The spike never drops. The radar never turns off. The developing nervous system is bathed in a toxic wash of cortisol 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years. This chronic, unrelenting exposure creates a physiological condition called HPA axis dysregulation. The internal thermostat for stress breaks. Decades later, when you're an adult, when you're living in a safe neighborhood, when the threat is entirely gone, your baseline cortisol remains pathologically high. Your radar is still spinning, looking for a threat that no longer exists. Or in some cases, the system becomes so exhausted that it burns out completely, leaving you with a blunted cortisol curve, resulting in a profound, paralyzing fatigue where you can't mount the energy to simply face the day. Now, why does a specific dysregulation cause obesity? This brings us to the concept of endocrine reprogramming. We have to stop thinking of cortisol as just a stress hormone. In the context of metabolic psychiatry and obesity medicine, cortisol acts as a highly potent fat storage hormone, and it's incredibly specific where it builds its reserves. As a medical doctor, when I look at patients with Cushing's disease, a condition where a tumor causes the body to produce massive unregulated amounts of cortisol, I see a very specific, recognizable body shape. These patients have thin arms and thin legs, but a massive, dense buildup of fat in the abdomen and in the back of the neck. This is because cortisol specifically targets visceral adipose tissue. Here we need to differentiate between fat types. Subcutaneous fat is the soft fat that sits right under your skin of your arms, hips, or legs, and it's mostly inert metabolic storage. Visceral fat cells possess a significantly higher density of glucocorticoid receptors, which, chemically speaking, this means visceral fat is sticky for cortisol. Why would the body do this? Why would the biological system forcefully packs fat tightly around your vital organs whenever you're stressed? Because visceral fat is biologically easier and can readily break down and release free fatty acids directly into the portal vein. The portal vein acts as a direct superhighway straight to the liver, where those fatty acids are instantly converted into glucose. If your traumatized nervous system genuinely believes you're living in a permanent war zone, it doesn't want your energy reserves stored far away in your thighs or arms, where it takes time and effort to access. It wants the fuel stored right next to where it needs to get processed. It wants instant energy ready to dump into the bloodstream at a millisecond's notice to fuel the fight or flight response. So that stubborn belly fat that you hate, that's a tactical bunker, and your body built a strategic, highly efficient fuel reserve to survive a war that ended 20 years ago. This physiological reality is exactly why traditional weight loss advice feels like gaslighting to a trauma survivor. Some people, even in the medical community, tell you to just cut calories. But to a dysregulated HbA axis, a calorie deficit is not a path to health. A calorie deficit is in fact a biological threat. Calorie restriction is a severe biological stressor, and it naturally raises cortisol, which leads to more fat storage. Let's say you listen to the advice. You go on a strict 1,000-calorie-a-day diet, which translates to you actively starving yourself. Your brain, which is already hypervigilant, already scanning the horizon for the next disaster, senses the sudden lack of incoming food. It sounds the alarms that the famine is here or the war has escalated. What does your body do in response? It fights back. It spikes your cortisol even higher. It downregulates your thyroid function to aggressively slow your resting metabolic rate. It clutches onto that visceral fat with a grip of iron, refusing to burn it, because your deep survival brain believes that fat is the only thing standing between you and death by starvation. You're fighting an ancient biology that's desperately trying to save your life. This isn't fighting lack of willpower, but the mechanism of trauma goes much deeper than just circulating hormones and fat storage. It goes down to the microscopic level. It goes to the very blueprint of your cells. To fully grasp the magnitude of the wound, we need to talk about the epigenetics. For a very long time in medicine, we believed that your genes were your absolute destiny. You were born with a fixed script inherited from your parents, and you simply played it out. If you had the obesity gene, you would be obese. We now know definitively that this is false. Think of your genes as the hardware of your computer. Epigenetics is like your operating system, and early life trauma can write the code. Think of it as a study of how behaviors, environment, and severe psychological stress cause physical changes that affect the way your genes work. These epigenetic changes don't mutate or alter underlying DNA sequence. Instead, they change how your body reads that sequence. They turn certain genes on and they forcefully switch other genes off. There is a highly specific, heavily studied gene called FKBP5. This gene plays a critical role in your stress response and acts as the negative feedback loop. It regulates the sensitivity of the glucocorticoid receptors, the microscopic ears on your cells that hear cortisol and tell your body to calm down after a stressor has passed. Recent studies have shown that experiencing severe early life trauma causes a process called methylation. A methyl group, a tiny chemical tag, physically attaches itself to the regulator region of the FKBP5 gene, effectively putting a padlock on a vital piece of machinery. This epigenetic tag fundamentally changes the sensitivity of your entire stress response system. It hardwires your cells at a molecular level to be hyperreactive to any future stress. Let me give you a clinical example of what this looks like in real world. This means that if you, with your history of childhood trauma and the resulting epigenetic methylation, and your best friend who had a perfectly safe, highly regulated childhood, both experienced the exact same modern stressor, the biological outcome is vastly different. Let's say you both get stuck in severe gridlock traffic on the way to a high-stakes meeting, or you both receive a vaguely threatening, rude email from your boss. Your friend's brain registers the threat. She gets a mild feeling of annoyance. Her cortisol goes up slightly to make her feel alert. She takes a deep breath, and within 10 minutes, her cortisol drops back to baseline. The event is practically over for her. You, on the other hand, experience a total physiological cascade. Your unmethylated, dysregulated system can't apply the brakes. You get a massive, disproportionate cortisol dump. Your heart races, your blood pressure elevates, your liver dumps glucose into the blood, causing a massive blood sugar spike. And your body receives a deafening chemical signal to store visceral fat. Same traffic, same email, vastly different biological response. Why is that? Because of the epigenetic software installed in your DNA decades ago, when you were, let's say, just 5 years old. This epigenetic scarring creates what we call a pro-inflammatory phenotype. Your body is locked in a state primed for inflammation. And as we'll learn, inflammation is the ultimate enemy of a healthy metabolism. This profound dysregulation leads us directly to the self-medication hypothesis. In episode 1, we talked about the dopamine hijack. We established how highly engineered food acts like a drug on the brain. But now, with the context of trauma, we can connect the final dots. We can answer why the hijack happens so fiercely in some people. Why do we relentlessly crave high-fat, high-sugar, ultra-processed foods when we're stressed, anxious, or triggered? Is this just because they taste good, or is it merely a pursuit of empty pleasure? Dr. Mary Dahlman, a pioneering researcher at the University of California in San Francisco, discovered something profound in her extensive research on the stress response network. She found that when a mammal ingests what we call comfort food, specifically the combination of high sugar and high fat, it effectively puts the biological brakes on your system. It actively, chemically dampens the stress response. When you eat the donut or the pizza or the sleeve of cookies, it causes a surge of insulin and alters glucocorticoid signaling in the brain. Your cortisol lowers. You feel a transient, genuine wash of physiological calm. The loud, anxious noise in your head temporarily stops. The tight, panicky feeling in your chest loosens. For a person living with severe HPA dysregulation and an overactive fear center, food is more than just nutrition or calories. It's the most readily available, socially acceptable pharmacological tool to downregulate a screaming emotional center of the brain called amygdala. You're essentially eating to forcefully lower your cortisol. You're utilizing food as an anxiolytic, but like any powerful drug, you build a rapid tolerance. Because your baseline cortisol is chronically high, your brain requires more and more sugar and more fat. to achieve the same dampening effect. Think about your own intense cravings for a moment. When you reach for those ultra-processed foods, are you truly physically hungry, or are you trying to turn down the volume of your stress? If you feel comfortable sharing, let me know in the comments. Do you tend to use food as fuel or as a sedative? Please be honest. Identifying this mechanism is a crucial step to healing it. This creates a devastating, self-perpetuating vicious cycle. The emotional stress drives the binge eating. The binge eating drives the storage of visceral fat. The expanding visceral fat creates systemic inflammation. And the systemic inflammation acts as a physiological stressor to the brain, which creates more stress. Finally, I want to address the most painful, sensitive, but perhaps the most clinically important part of this biology, the concept of the armor. In Dr. Feliti's original thousands of patient interviews and in the clinical experience of obesity medicine physicians worldwide, we have observed a heartbreaking pattern among survivors of sexual abuse, physical boundary violations, and severe childhood bullying. For many of these individuals, the excess adipose tissue serves a highly specific protective function. It desexualizes the body and creates a physical barrier, a thick layer of insulation between the vulnerable inner self and a dangerous outer world. It makes them feel invisible to the predators, or conversely, it makes them feel big enough and imposing enough to never be victimized again. Biologically, we see this physiological paradox mirrored in the hormone leptin. We typically think of leptin as our primary satiety hormone, the signal that tells us we're full. But from a strict biological perspective, leptin acts as a permission hormone. High circulating leptin levels, which come from having high body fat, signals to the hypothalamus that the body has enough energy to safely reproduce. But if the traumatized nervous system has deeply tagged reproduction, intimacy, or unwanted physical attention as a severe life-threatening danger, the psyche and the biology enter a brutal war. Your conscious logical mind looks in the mirror and says, I want to lose weight. I want to feel lighter. I want to be healthy. But your subconscious primitive survival brain also says, if you get small, you can get hurt. If you get attractive, you may get attacked. And in the battle between the logical mind and the survival brain controls the metabolic levers. So let's say you start a new diet. You lose 20 pounds. People start noticing. Coworkers comment on how great you look. Someone gives you an unsolicited physical compliment. And suddenly, absolute panic sets in. The central nervous system alarm rings. The insomnia starts. The anxiety spikes to unbearable levels. And the subconscious sabotage begins. You find yourself mindlessly binging in the middle of the night and quickly gain the 20 pounds back, probably plus an extra 10 pounds of buffer. And you sit there devastated, blaming your willpower. You call yourself weak, undisciplined, and broken. But you weren't weak. You were terrified. Your body sensed a massive vulnerability, the sudden loss of your protective armor, and it rushed to build the wall to keep you safe. This is exactly what I mean when I say severe obesity is a neurometabolic adaptation. Your weight is not the core problem. Your weight is the solution your body brilliantly created to solve the much deeper problem of feeling fundamentally unsafe. So where does this reality leave us? If your fat cells are structurally programmed by your childhood trauma, and your DNA is epigenetically tagged by unhealed stress, are you doomed? Is this a permanent life sentence? Are you destined to fight your weight forever? Absolutely not. Epigenetics is like a switch. And the great thing about switches is that they can be flipped back. The human brain possesses extraordinary neuroplasticity, the ability to rewrite its neural pathways. The HPA axis, no matter how dysregulated, can be recalibrated. But, and this is the single most important clinical nuance I will give you in this entire series. You can't fix a trauma-induced metabolism issue with a calorie deficit alone. If you try to simply diet the weight off without actively addressing the underlying nervous system dysregulation, you're just aggressively poking a sleeping bear. You're adding physiological stress to psychological stress. You're triggering the exact survival mechanism that's keeping you heavy in the first place. The path forward, the true protocol for lasting biological healing, which we'll detail step by step in the final episode of this series, requires a complete reversal of that traditional order of operation. Most people and some medical professionals tell you to do this. Diet first, exercise vigorously, and maybe try some stress management or meditation last if you have free time. For the trauma phenotype, this order is a recipe for catastrophic failure. The order must be entirely flipped. Safety first. Before we cut a single calorie, we have to convince the emotional center of the brain, your amygdala, that the war is definitely over. This involves active, daily nervous system regulation. This means somatic experiencing, targeted vagus nerve stimulation to increase parasympathetic vagal tone, and aggressive sleep regulation to lower baseline cortisol. Regulation is second. We have to mechanically fix the broken cortisol rhythm. This means utilizing early morning sunlight viewing to set the circadian clock, implementing strict protein pacing to stabilize blood sugar, and setting fierce interpersonal boundaries to stop new stress from entering the system. Nutrition is third. Only once the nervous system feels safe do we focus on the plate. And we nourish the body specifically to lower systemic inflammation rather than starving it to forcefully induce weight loss. We have to methodically dismantle the bunker, not by violently attacking it with starvation, but by peacefully proving to the cellular biology that the war is over. We covered some heavy paradigm shifting biology today. But before we can fully engage in that repair, we have to deeply understand the biological cost of carrying this armor. Because when the human body stays in this high cortisol, high visceral fat survival mode for years and decades, something concerning begins to happen. The visceral fat tissue doesn't just sit there quietly. It's highly active, and over time, it starts to suffer from hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. It starts to change, and when visceral fat gets like this, it starts to send out powerful, destructive immune signals called inflammatory cytokines. These cytokines travel through your bloodstream, and they're capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier, creating not only systemic inflammation, but also affect the optimal brain function. In our next episode, we're going to talk about the fire. We're going to connect the biology of obesity directly to the pathology of clinical depression. We're going to explain at the cellular level why you feel so overwhelmingly tired all the time, why you suffer from debilitating brain fog, and why you have zero motivation to do the things you used to love. We're going to introduce you to a concept called sickness behavior, and we're going to explore the terrifying reality that your deep depression might not be just a chemical imbalance in your brain, but also secondary to metabolic change to your own inflamed adipose tissue. If this episode resonated with you today, if you felt seen perhaps for the very first time, I'm asking you not to keep this information to yourself. There is someone in your life right now who is looking in the mirror, crying, convinced that they're just lazy or broken. They have no idea they're carrying a profound physiological wound. Share this video with them to help them understand that their lifelong struggle is not a character flaw. If this is the first video you watched on my channel, welcome to my channel. If you haven't already, I would appreciate you subscribing to the channel and turning on your notifications so you don't miss the next step. And please join us as we continue to map this concept out. Thank you for being here and for your interest in medical sciences. Stay curious, and above all, stay uninflamed. I'll see you in the next video.